The look on Michael's face when he opened the door told me everything I needed to know. Behind his forced smile and stiff posture, I could see it, shame mixed with annoyance. His eyes darted nervously behind me to check if any neighbors were watching as I stood on the doorstep of his beautiful Shaker Heights home, 2 suitcases at my feet. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mom, he said, his voice tight. I thought you weren't coming. Until tomorrow. The landlord changed the final inspection to today, I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. I texted Jessica about it yesterday. His jaw clenched slightly at the mention of his wife. Right. She might have mentioned it. The silence that followed was excruciating as we both stood there, mother and son, suddenly strangers to each other. Just 3 weeks ago, I had a home of my own, a 20-year career as an industrial engineer at Midwest Manufacturing, and my dignity. Now, at 58, I was jobless, homeless, and about to become the unwelcome guest in my own son's basement. Michael reluctantly picked up one of my suitcases, leaving the heavier one for me to manage. As we entered the immaculate foyer with its gleaming hardwood floors and designer furnishings, Jessica appeared at the top of the stairs. Her perfectly highlighted hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, her expression carefully neutral. Sarah, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. Welcome. Not Mom, not even Mrs. Johnson. Just Sarah. After 5 years of marriage to my son, she still kept me at arm's length, treating me more like an acquaintance than family. I forced a smile anyway. Thank you for having me, Jessica. I promise this will only be temporary. Of course, she replied with a tight smile. Family helps family. The words were right, but the tone made it clear what she really thought of this arrangement. I was an inconvenience, a disruption to their perfect life. Michael cleared his throat. I've set up the basement for you, he said, already walking toward the door that led downstairs. It's not fancy, but it's private. I followed him down, the carpeted steps to what they called their lower level, a finished basement that served primarily as storage space. Michael had cleared an area near the small window and set up a twin bed, a nightstand, and a small dresser. The ceiling was low, the lighting dim, and despite the carpet, there was an unmistakable chill in the air. The bathroom down here works fine, but the shower head is a bit wonky, Michael explained, speaking too quickly. The Wi-Fi password is on the nightstand. Jessica uses the treadmill sometimes in the mornings, but otherwise, you'll have plenty of privacy. Privacy. Such a polite word for isolation. It's perfect, I lied. Thank you. Michael nodded, glancing at his watch. I've got a conference call in 10 minutes. Help yourself to anything in the kitchen, but Jessica is experimenting with some kind of keto diet thing, so maybe check with her before using any special ingredients. And with that, he was gone, taking the stairs 2 at a time, leaving me alone in my new underground home. I sat on the edge of the twin bed and finally let my shoulders slump. 3 weeks ago, I was overseeing an entire production department. Now I couldn't even have a banana without permission. How quickly life can change. For 20 years, I had worked at Midwest Manufacturing, steadily climbing from junior engineer to production manager. I had put Michael through college, paid off my modest house in Cleveland Heights, and built what I thought was a secure future. Then, Midwest was acquired by Vertex Technologies, a larger company based in Chicago, and the restructuring began. Entire departments were eliminated, including mine. At 58, with a specialized skill set, and in an industry where youth was increasingly valued over experience, my prospects were bleak. I had enough savings to cover 3 months of expenses, maybe 6 if I was extremely careful. The problem was my mortgage. After helping Michael with the down payment on his house 2 years ago, my financial cushion had been significantly depleted. When the layoff came, I made the difficult decision to sell my house quickly rather than risk foreclosure later. The market was decent, but not great. After settling the mortgage and paying the realtor fees, I had enough to stay afloat for maybe a year if I was frugal. But I needed a place to live while I job hunted, and with apartment rental prices skyrocketing in Cleveland, staying with Michael temporarily seemed like the most practical solution. "It'll just be for a few weeks until I find something," I had assured him over the phone. "I don't want to impose." "Of course, Mom," he had replied with forced enthusiasm. "We've got plenty of space." Now, unpacking my clothes into the small dresser, I wondered if he'd even consulted Jessica before agreeing. Based on her chilly reception, I suspected not. My phone buzzed with a text message. Linda Martinez, my closest friend and former colleague from Midwest Manufacturing. "Settled in yet? How's the Palace of Shaker Heights?" I smiled, grateful for Linda's humor. She had been laid off in the same restructuring, but with grown children scattered across the country and a husband with a secure job, her situation wasn't nearly as precarious as mine. "Living the dream in the royal basement," I texted back. "Queen Sarah of the storage boxes." "Hang in there," came her reply. "Lunch tomorrow, the lakeside, my treat." "You're saving my sanity," I responded, already looking forward to escaping. Even briefly, I finished unpacking and ventured upstairs. The kitchen was spotless, with gleaming stainless steel appliances and pristine white countertops. No sign of Jessica or Michael. On the refrigerator door, a handwritten note caught my eye. "Family dinner, 7 p.m. Please set the table. Jay." It wasn't even a request, just an instruction. I glanced at my watch. It was just past 5. Setting the table would take 5 minutes, but I decided to wait until closer to 7. I wasn't an employee to be given tasks without so much as a please. Instead, I retreated to the basement to continue my job search. I had applied to 17 positions in the past 3 weeks, ranging from hopeful matches to desperate reaches. So far, I'd received 5 automated rejections and 12 silences that were gradually transforming into implicit rejections with each passing day. At 6:45, I went upstairs to set the table. Jessica was in the kitchen, arranging chicken breasts on a sheet pan. "I was just about to set the table," I said, opening what I hoped was the cabinet with plates. "Plates are in the next cabinet over," she corrected. "We use the white ones for everyday meals. The napkins are in the drawer under the microwave." I nodded, retrieving the items as instructed. Setting a table wasn't rocket science, but in Jessica's kitchen, everything had to be just so. I placed the plates, silverware, and napkins in what I hoped was the approved arrangement. "Michael usually sits at the head of the table," Jessica informed me, not looking up from her dinner preparation. "I'm on his right, and you can sit across from me." Of course, even the seating arrangement reinforced the hierarchy in this house. Michael at the head, Jessica at his right hand, and me, the unemployed mother, across from her facing the kitchen. "Know your place, Sarah." Michael arrived home at exactly 7 p.m., loosening his tie as he entered the kitchen. He kissed Jessica on the cheek and gave me an awkward pat on the shoulder. "Smells great, honey," he said to Jessica. "How was everyone's day?" Jessica launched into a detailed account of her real estate showings. She worked part-time as a realtor for high-end properties, while Michael nodded appreciatively. When she finished, he shared a few highlights from his day at Vertex Technologies, where he'd been promoted to vice president of operations just 6 months earlier. "We're finally implementing that new production line I was telling you about," he said, cutting into his chicken. "Henderson thinks it could reduce costs by at least 20%. "That's impressive," Jessica remarked. "Robert has always had an eye for innovation." Robert Henderson was the CEO of Vertex, and from the way Jessica used his first name, I gathered they had some kind of social relationship outside of work. The conversation continued, with both of them discussing people and projects I knew nothing about, effectively excluding me from the discussion. Finally, during a lull, Michael seemed to remember I was there. "How about you, Mom? Any luck with the job search?" "I have a few applications out," I said, trying to sound more optimistic than I felt. "I'm meeting Linda for lunch tomorrow to network a bit." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "That's good," Michael replied, though his tone suggested he didn't have much faith in my prospects. "Networking is important. Have you considered something different?" Jessica asked delicately. "I mean, at your age, maybe it's time to think about less demanding roles." "At my age?" The word stung more than she could possibly know. "I'm looking at all options," I replied evenly. "But I have 20 years of experience in industrial engineering and manufacturing optimization. It would be a waste not to use that expertise." Jessica and Michael exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. They thought I was being unrealistic. "Well, Cleveland Heights Community Center is looking for a front desk person," Jessica offered. "Part-time, but it might be something to consider. While you're looking for something else." I nodded, not trusting myself to respond without revealing my hurt. 20 years of specialized expertise, and my daughter-in-law thought I should answer phones at a community center. After dinner, I insisted on doing the dishes, partly to contribute and partly to have something to do with my hands while I processed my emotions. Michael and Jessica retired to the living room to watch a show, their voices and occasional laughter drifting into the kitchen. I wasn't invited to join them. Back in the basement, I sat on my twin bed and opened my laptop. Instead of returning to the job boards, I found myself opening a folder I hadn't looked at in years, my projects and innovations from Midwest manufacturing. Most prominent among them was the integrated production optimization system I had developed 5 years ago, which had revolutionized our manufacturing process, reducing costs by nearly 40% and increasing output by 25%. It had been my crowning achievement. The company had implemented it across all production lines, and I had been promised a substantial bonus and recognition. Then the management changed, new priorities emerged, and somehow my innovation became attributed to the engineering team, rather than to me specifically. The bonus never materialized, but the system remained in place, continuing to save the company millions each year. I clicked through the files, the original schematics, the process flowcharts, the projected savings analyses, all created by me. A deep sense of pride mingled with resentment washed over me. I had given Midwest manufacturing my best years and my best ideas, and what did I have to show for it? A twin bed in my son's basement and a suggestion to work at a community center. My phone buzzed again. A text from Linda. "Confirmed for lunch tomorrow, 1 p.m. Also, heard through the grapevine that Vertex is hiring for their Cleveland office. Might be worth looking into." Vertex, Michael's company. The same company that had acquired Midwest and laid me off through their restructuring. The irony was almost too much, but I was in no position to be proud. If there was an opportunity at Vertex that matched my skills, I would have to pursue it, awkward as it might be to work at the same company as my son. "Thanks," I texted back. "We'll check it out." As I prepared for bed in the small, chilly bathroom, I could hear footsteps above me. Michael and Jessica moving around, living their life in the warm, well-lit space above. Here in the basement, with its low ceiling and single small window, I felt more than physical distance from them. I felt a chasm of understanding, of respect, of basic human dignity. When had my own son started seeing me as an inconvenience rather than a person? When had I become someone to be managed and minimized rather than valued and supported? Had I somehow taught him this? Or was this just what happened when your market value, your economic usefulness, diminished? I slipped beneath the covers of the twin bed, pulling the blanket tight around my shoulders against the basement chill. Tomorrow, I would meet Linda for lunch. Tomorrow, I would check the Vertex job listings. Tomorrow, I would continue pretending that this arrangement was temporary, manageable, acceptable. But as I drifted off to sleep, a different thought formed in my mind, shadowy at first, then gaining clarity and strength. I had created an entire production system that continued to generate millions in value. I had solved complex engineering problems that others couldn't. I had built things that lasted. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as powerless as Michael and Jessica believed. Maybe I still had something valuable to offer. Something that couldn't be dismissed with a pat on the shoulder and a community center application. With that thought warming me more effectively than the thin blanket, I finally fell asleep in my son's basement, dreaming of machines and systems and solutions that no one but me could design. The next morning, I woke to the rhythmic thud of Jessica's feet on the treadmill, positioned directly above my bed. 5:30 a.m. I pulled the pillow over my head, but it did little to muffle the sound. After 20 minutes of trying to fall back, asleep, I gave up, dressed quietly, and made my way upstairs. The kitchen was empty, the house still except for Jessica's workout. I made coffee as quietly as possible, not wanting to disturb Michael, who was presumably still asleep. As I sat at the kitchen island with my mug, I opened my laptop and navigated to the Vertex Technologies career page. Sure enough, there were several open positions at the Cleveland office, including one that caught my eye immediately. Senior Manufacturing Systems Engineer. The job description might as well have been written with my resume in mind. Experience with integrated production, systems, knowledge of lean manufacturing principles, ability to implement cost-saving measures across complex operations. I was reading through the requirements when I heard Jessica coming up from the basement. She entered the kitchen in her workout clothes, slightly sweaty but still perfectly put together somehow. "Oh," she said, seeming startled to find me there. "You're up early." "The treadmill," I explained simply. "Right, sorry about that." She didn't sound particularly sorry. "Michael usually sleeps through it." She poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, eyeing my laptop screen. "Job hunting already?" "Just looking at some options," I said, angling the screen away slightly. Something told me that discussing a position at Vertex with Jessica wasn't the best idea just yet. "Anything promising?" "Maybe. I'm meeting Linda today to discuss some possibilities." Jessica nodded, then glanced at her watch. "I'd better get ready. I have an early showing in Beechwood." As she turned to leave, she added, "Help yourself to anything for breakfast, except the protein bars in the blue container. Those are Michael's special ones." Once again, instructions delivered as an afterthought. I closed my laptop and prepared a simple breakfast of toast and tea. By the time Michael came downstairs, dressed in a crisp suit and checking emails on his phone, Jessica had already left. "Morning, Mom," he said, barely glancing up. "Sleep okay?" "Fine," I lied. "You're dressed up today." "Meeting with Henderson and the executive team. Quarterly strategy session." He grabbed one of his special protein bars from the blue container. "We're discussing the rollout of that new production system I mentioned." My interest was immediately piqued. "What kind of production system?" Michael looked up, seeming surprised by my question. "It's a comprehensive optimization protocol for medical device manufacturing. Cuts costs, increases output, reduces defects, the whole package. Henderson's been pushing it as the future of Vertex." "Sounds impressive," I said carefully. "Was it developed in-house?" "Came with the Midwest acquisition, I think." He checked his watch. "I've got to run. The basement bathroom acting up at all?" "The plumber said he fixed the drip, but I'm not convinced." And just like that, the conversation shifted from manufacturing innovation, my area of expertise, to a leaky faucet. I assured him the bathroom was fine, and he departed with a hurried goodbye, and the faint scent of expensive cologne. Alone in the house, I returned to my laptop and the Vertex job listing. With growing determination, I began to update my resume, tailoring it specifically for the senior manufacturing systems engineer position. I included detailed descriptions of the integrated production optimization system I had developed at Midwest, complete with the verifiable performance improvements it had generated. By the time I left to meet Linda for lunch, my application was complete and ready to submit. The Lakeside Cafe was a small restaurant overlooking Lake Erie, far enough from both Vertex and Shaker Heights that I didn't have to worry about running into Michael or any of his colleagues. Linda was already seated at a table by the window when I arrived. "Look at you," she said, standing to embrace me. "Still carrying yourself like the engineering powerhouse you are." Her words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. It had been so long since anyone had described me in terms of my professional capabilities, rather than my age or employment status. "Barely," I admitted as we sat down. "Being unemployed is taking more of a toll than I expected." "How's life? In the lap of luxury with your VP son?" Linda asked, studying my face. I hesitated, then decided honesty was more important than pride. "He's got me in the basement, below the treadmill." Linda's eyes widened. "The basement? You? After you helped with their down payment?" I nodded, picking up my menu to avoid her gaze. "It's just temporary." "It's ridiculous is what it is," Linda declared. "That boy used to boast to everyone about his brilliant engineer mom. Now he's got you sleeping with the water heater?" "It's a finished basement," I said, as if that somehow made it better. And, to be fair, it was very last minute. They weren't expecting to have a middle-aged house guest. "You're not a house guest. You're his mother," Linda corrected. "And middle-aged? Please. We're not even old enough for senior discounts at the movies yet." She shook her head in disapproval. "So what's the plan, besides escaping the basement dungeon?" I told her about the job listing at Vertex and my decision to apply, despite the awkwardness of potentially working at the same company as Michael. "Vertex, huh?" Linda said thoughtfully. "Interesting choice. Did you know they've been implementing your optimization system across all their newly acquired divisions?" I stared at her. "My system? From Midwest?" "The very same. Word is, it's been a game changer for them. Henderson presents it at every industry conference as Vertex's proprietary innovation." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "Michael mentioned a production system they're rolling out. He said it came with the Midwest acquisition." "Oh, it came. With the acquisition all right?" Linda said, a edge to her voice. "Along with all the patents and intellectual property. But I bet they've conveniently forgotten who actually created it." My mind was racing. When Midwest implemented my system, there had been talk of patents, but in the chaos of changing management, it had never been properly filed. At least not with my name on it. Had Midwest, or now Vertex, patented my work without crediting me? "I need to find out more," I said, my lunch suddenly forgotten. "If they're using my system and claiming it as their own..." "You might have leverage," Linda finished for me, "especially if the proper attributions weren't filed. You kept all your original documentation, right?" "Every file, every draft, every test result," I confirmed. "All time-stamped and backed up." "Good girl," Linda said with a satisfied nod. "Now, eat your sandwich. You're going to need your strength." As we finished our lunch, Linda provided more industry gossip, including rumors that Vertex was planning to go public within the year, with much of their projected value tied to the revolutionary production system they had acquired. "Your system could be worth millions to them in..." "The IPO," Linda mused, "especially with how they're positioning it as the cornerstone of their manufacturing strategy." By the time I returned to Michael's house, my mind was churning with possibilities and plans. The house was empty, with both Michael and Jessica still at work. I went straight to the basement and pulled out my external hard drive, which contained backups of all my work from Midwest. I spent the afternoon digging through digital folders, organizing documentation, and creating a timeline of the development and implementation of my optimization system. Every line of code, every process diagram, every implementation note, all clearly created by me, all predating Vertex's acquisition of Midwest by years. As I worked, a mixture of anger and incredulity grew within me. My innovation, the system I had poured thousands of hours into perfecting, was now being presented as Vertex's crown jewel, without so much as a mention of my name. And my own son, who had heard me talk about this system for years during its development, was now part of the team rolling it out as if it had sprung fully formed from Vertex's genius. Did Michael know? Had he made the connection between his mother's work and the system his company was so proudly implementing? Or had the corporate attribution been so thoroughly erased that even he didn't realize the origin of the innovation he was now championing? I was so absorbed in my research that I lost track of time. The sound of the garage door opening alerted me to Michael's return. I quickly saved my files and closed my laptop just as footsteps sounded on the stairs to the basement. "Mom?" Michael called. "You down here?" "Yes," I answered, tucking the external hard drive into my laptop bag. Michael appeared at the bottom of the stairs, still in his suit but with his tie loosened. "How was your day? Any luck with the job search?" "Actually, yes," I said carefully. "I found an interesting position at Vertex, Senior Manufacturing Systems Engineer." His expression flickered with surprise, then something like discomfort. "At Vertex? My Vertex? Unless there's another one." "In Cleveland," I replied with a slight smile. "Mom, I don't think that's a good idea," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "It would be weird, us working at the same company." Weird? Or embarrassing? The question hung in the air between us, sharper than I had intended. Michael looked taken aback. "Neither," he said defensively. "It's just, Vertex is very particular about their hiring process, and the manufacturing division is Robert Henderson's baby. He personally approves every senior engineer." "And you don't think I'd measure up to Robert Henderson's standards?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Michael sighed. "That's not what I meant. It's just a very competitive position, and at your—" He caught himself, but not quickly enough. "At my age?" I finished for him. "Michael, I've been an industrial engineer longer than you've been alive. I've designed and implemented systems that have saved companies millions, including, from what I understand, a system that Vertex is currently implementing across its divisions." His eyes narrowed slightly. "What are you talking about?" "The Integrated Production Optimization System, the one you mentioned this morning, the one that came with the Midwest acquisition." Recognition dawned on his face, followed by confusion. "Wait, are you saying—" "I designed that system, Michael. From concept to implementation. It was my project at Midwest for over 2 years, the same system that Robert Henderson is now presenting as Vertex's proprietary innovation." Michael stared at me, his mouth slightly open. That's not possible. Henderson says it was developed by Midwest's engineering team before the acquisition." "The engineering team," I repeated with a bitter laugh. "That's a convenient way of erasing individual contribution, isn't it? Especially when the individual in question is a 58-year-old woman who's easy to dismiss and lay off." "Mom, you can't just claim you designed Vertex's cornerstone production system," Michael said, his voice rising. "Do you know how serious that accusation is? Henderson has built the company's entire growth strategy around that system." "I'm not claiming anything," I said calmly. "I'm stating a fact. The Integrated Production Optimization System was my creation. I have every file, every draft, every test result to prove it, all time-stamped, all predating Vertex's acquisition of Midwest by years." Michael ran a hand through his hair, his expression a mixture of disbelief and growing concern. "Even if what you're saying is true, and I'm not saying it is, what exactly do you expect to happen here?" You're going to apply for a job at Vertex and then, what? Tell Henderson he's been presenting your work as his company's innovation? I expect proper attribution and compensation for my intellectual property, I said simply. And yes, I'm going to apply for the job, unless you think your mother isn't qualified. Before Michael could respond, Jessica called down the stairs. Michael, dinner's almost ready. Is Sarah coming up? Michael looked at me, conflict evident in his eyes. We'll talk about this later, he said in a low voice, then called back to Jessica. We'll be right up. Throughout dinner, Michael was distracted, barely participating in Jessica's account of her day. I could almost see the wheels turning in, his head, processing what I had told him, trying to reconcile it with what he believed about his company and its prized production system. After dinner, Jessica announced she was meeting friends for drinks, leaving Michael and me alone in the yaw. As soon as the door closed behind her, he turned to me. Show me, he said. Show me the proof that you designed the system. I retrieved my laptop and external hard drive from the basement, and for the next 2 hours, I walked Michael through the development of the Integrated Production Optimization System. I showed him the original concept documents, the iterative design phases, the test results from the pilot implementation, and the full rollout plan, all bearing my name, all clearly documented with dates and timestamps. As he scrolled through the files, his expression shifted from skepticism to concern to something approaching alarm. This is comprehensive, he admitted finally. But I still don't understand. If you designed this system, why didn't you get credit for it? Why wasn't it patented in your name? It was supposed to be, I explained. The patent application was in process when Midwest management changed. The new leadership was less interested in individual attribution and more focused on positioning the company for acquisition. Somehow, in the transition, my name was removed from the patent application, and the system became attributed to the engineering team. And you just let that happen? Michael asked incredulously. I fought it at the time, I said, the old frustration resurging. But I was one person against a corporation in transition. By the time I realized what had happened, the wheels were already in motion. I was told to be a team player, that the company's success was more important than individual recognition. Michael was quiet for a long moment, staring at the screen. This is the same system that Henderson presents at every quarterly meeting. The same system he's building our entire production strategy around. The same system that's projected to increase Vertex's valuation by at least 30% before the IPO. IPO? I echoed, though Linda had mentioned rumors of this. Michael nodded, distracted. Vertex is planning to go public next quarter. The production system, your system, is central to our growth narrative. It's what sets us apart from competitors. The implications were suddenly much larger than I had initially realized. This wasn't just about attribution or even compensation. This was about a company potentially building its public offering on an innovation they had effectively appropriated. Michael, I said carefully, what would happen if it came to light that Vertex didn't actually develop this system? That it was created by a single engineer who was laid off during restructuring and who never signed over her intellectual property rights? He looked up at me, his face pale. It would be catastrophic. The IPO could be delayed or even canceled. Henderson's credibility would be destroyed. The company's value could plummet overnight. And your position? As Vice President of Operations? He swallowed hard. I'd be finished at Vertex, possibly in the industry. The weight of the situation settled between us. My son's career versus my intellectual property rights. The comfort and security he had built for himself versus the recognition and compensation I deserved for my work. What are you going to do? Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It was the first time since I'd arrived that he had asked what I wanted, rather than telling me what he thought I should do. Progress, of a sort. I haven't decided yet, I answered honestly. But I do know that I can't keep sleeping in your basement. While the company you work for profits from my innovation without acknowledgement or compensation. Michael nodded slowly, a new understanding seeming to dawn in his eyes. No, you can't, he agreed. And you shouldn't have to. We sat in silence for a moment, the laptop screen still displaying the evidence of my work, my contribution, my value. I need to think, Michael finally said, standing up. This is a lot to process. Take your time, I replied. I've waited 5 years for recognition. I can wait a little longer. As Michael went upstairs, presumably to grapple with the implications of what he had learned, I remained at the kitchen table, staring at my laptop screen. The path forward wasn't clear yet, but for the first time since losing my job, I felt a sense of strength returning. I had created something valuable. Something so valuable that an entire company was building its future around it. That knowledge, that certainty, was worth more than any basement bedroom or community center job application could diminish. Whatever came next, whether a legal battle, a negotiation, or some yet unimagined resolution, I would face it not as Michael's unemployed mother or as an aging engineer struggling to find work, but as the creator of an innovation worth millions. As someone whose contribution mattered, whether others had recognized it or not. And that recognition, I realized, had to start with me. The following morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. The basement ceiling still hung low above me, the small window barely letting in the morning light, but something had shifted inside me. Knowledge was power, and for the first time since losing my job, I held something valuable in my hands. I could hear movement upstairs, Michael getting ready for work, his footsteps more hesitant than usual. Our conversation last night had clearly shaken him. Finding out that your mother created the system your boss presents as the company's crowning achievement would be unsettling for anyone. I dressed quickly and made my way upstairs, hoping to catch Michael before he left. He was in the kitchen, staring into his coffee mug with an intensity that suggested he wasn't thinking about coffee at all. Morning, I said, keeping my voice neutral as I reached for a mug. Michael looked up, dark circles under his eyes revealing a night of little sleep. Mom, he began, then hesitated. I've been thinking about what you showed me. And? I poured my coffee, giving him space to continue. I did some digging last night. Looked through internal documents about the acquisition of Midwest and the integration of the production system. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from his childhood whenever he was troubled. There's no mention of individual creators anywhere. The system is consistently referred to as proprietary technology developed by Midwest Engineering. I nodded, unsurprised. That's consistent with how they handled it internally after the management change. But here's the thing, Michael continued, lowering his voice though Jessica was upstairs in the shower. I found financial projections for the IPO. Mom, they're valuing the production system, your system, at nearly $200 million as an intellectual property asset. The number hit me like a physical blow. $200 million for my work. My innovation, my sleepless nights and working weekends and meticulous problem-solving, while I slept in a basement and applied for jobs that no one seemed interested in giving to a woman my age. I see, I managed, keeping my voice steady. What are you going to do? Michael asked, and I could hear the conflict in his voice. Concern for his mother warring with fear for his career. I'm still figuring that out, I answered honestly. But first, I'm going to submit my application for that senior manufacturing systems engineer position. Michael frowned. After what we discovered, you still want to work at Vertex? It's a starting point, I said. A way in. I need to understand exactly how they're using my system and what claims they're making about its origins. That's strategic, Michael admitted, sounding almost impressed. But Henderson personally reviews all senior engineering applications. If he recognizes your name from Midwest, He won't, I said with certainty. I never met Robert Henderson. During the acquisition, I dealt exclusively with mid-level managers. Besides, do you really think the CEO of Vertex would remember the name of every engineer from a company they acquired and then partially dismantled? Michael conceded the point with a nod. Just be careful, Mom. This could get complicated. It already is complicated, I replied. But thank you for your concern. He checked his watch and stood. I have an early meeting. We're finalizing the implementation schedule for the East Coast facilities. A flash of discomfort crossed his face as he realized he was talking about the rollout of my system. Michael, I said as he gathered his things, I want you to know that whatever I decide to do, I'll try to ensure it doesn't splash back on you. He paused at the door, his expression unreadable. I appreciate that. But Mom, just so we're clear, if what you're saying is true, if you really did create this system and they took it without proper attribution or compensation, that's wrong, and you deserve better. With that surprisingly supportive statement, he left, the sound of his car starting in the driveway moments later. I sat at the kitchen island, somewhat stunned by this shift in Michael's attitude. For weeks, he had been treating me like an inconvenient house guest, someone to be managed and tolerated. Now, he was acknowledging my professional worth and the injustice of my situation, all because he had seen evidence of my value to others. I finished my coffee and opened my laptop, navigating to the Vertex Technologies careers page. I reviewed my application one final time, then clicked submit, sending my resume and credentials directly into the belly of the beast that had, in a sense, already consumed my most valuable professional contribution. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda. Made any decisions? Just submitted my application to Vertex, I replied. Also, did you know they're valuing the system at $200 million for their IPO? Linda's response came quickly. What? Call me now. Instead of calling, I texted back, meeting someone for legal advice today. We'll fill you in after. That someone was Thomas Wilson, a former colleague's husband who specialized in intellectual property law. I had called him last night after Michael went upstairs, explaining my situation in broad strokes. He had agreed to meet me for a consultation at his office downtown. I was getting dressed when Jessica appeared in the basement doorway, looking somewhat uncomfortable. Sarah, she began, hovering on the bottom step. Michael mentioned you might be pursuing a position at Vertex. The speed of information sharing between them didn't surprise me, but her bringing it up did. I've submitted an application, I confirmed, watching her reaction carefully. Jessica nodded, chewing her lower lip slightly. Michael also mentioned other things about a system you developed at your former company. The integrated production optimization system, I supplied, curious about where this conversation was heading. Yes, that. She took another step into the basement. This might sound strange, but Robert Henderson has been to our home for dinner several times. This was unexpected information. You socialize with the CEO of Vertex? Michael's been identified as high-potential leadership, Jessica explained, a hint of pride in her voice. Henderson mentors a few select executives personally. The dinners are part of that. I see, I said, beginning to understand why she had sought me out. And you're concerned that if I pursue this issue with my system, it might affect Michael's relationship with Henderson. Jessica's shoulders relaxed slightly, relieved that I had gotten to the point without her having to say it explicitly. Michael works so hard. This mentorship with Henderson is a huge opportunity. If there's any way to resolve your concerns without involving Henderson directly, the implication was clear. Please don't rock the boat that my son is sailing. And does Jessica, I said carefully, imagine you spent years creating something valuable in your field, something innovative that changed how real estate transactions worked. Then imagine that work was taken without your permission, without credit, and was being used to generate millions in value for someone else. Would you just let that go? She hesitated, clearly torn between self-interest and a basic sense of fairness. No, she admitted finally. I wouldn't. I won't do anything reckless, I assured her. But I can't ignore this either. Jessica nodded, accepting this answer even if it wasn't what she had hoped for. I understand. Just, please keep Michael's position in mind. I always do, I replied, and I meant it. Despite our strained relationship, despite the basement, bedroom, and the subtle indignities, Michael was still my son, and I didn't want to harm his career if it could be avoided. After Jessica left for her real estate showings, I called a rideshare to take me downtown to Thomas Wilson's office. The law firm occupied several floors of a sleek glass building overlooking Lake Erie, and Thomas himself greeted me in a conference room with views of the water. Sarah, he said warmly, shaking my hand. It's been too long. Laura sends her regards. Laura Wilson had been a project manager at Midwest before moving to another company a year before the acquisition. She had always respected my work and had been one of the few to privately express outrage when my system became attributed to the engineering team, rather than to me personally. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice, I said as we sat at the conference table. Laura speaks very highly of your work, Thomas replied, opening a leather portfolio. Now, tell me more about this system and the current situation. For the next hour, I walked him through everything: the development of the integrated production optimization system, the managerial changes at Midwest that led to my name being removed from attribution, the acquisition by Vertex, my subsequent layoff, and the discovery that Vertex was now presenting the system as the cornerstone of their production strategy and impending IPO. Thomas listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions or making notes. When I finished, he sat back, fingers steepled in thought. You've brought an extremely interesting case to me, Sarah, he said finally. From what you've described, you have a potentially strong claim to intellectual property that Vertex is valuing at a significant amount for their public offering. But, I prompted, hearing the reservation in his voice. But cases like this are complex and often hinge on the specific documentation and the paper trail of ownership attribution. You mentioned you have comprehensive files showing your development work. Do you have any documentation regarding the original discussions about patenting or attributing the system? I thought back to those tense meetings after the management change. I have emails from that period discussing the patent application process. In the earlier emails, my name is clearly listed as the inventor. In later communications, after the new management took over, the language shifts to talk about the engineering team's innovation. That transition in language could be very important, Thomas noted. What about your employment contract with Midwest? Did it include standard intellectual property assignment clauses? It did, I acknowledged. But the system wasn't developed as part of my assigned duties. It was an independent initiative I pursued after identifying inefficiencies in our production processes. I presented it to management only after developing the core architecture on my own time. Thomas's eyebrows rose with interest. That could be a crucial distinction. If you can demonstrate that the initial development was outside your assigned responsibilities, you might have a claim even with standard IP assignment language in your contract. He paused, making another note. There's also the matter of the IPO. Companies are required to make comprehensive disclosures about their intellectual property assets before going public, especially when those assets represent a significant portion of the company's value proposition. If Vertex is claiming clean ownership of a system without disclosing potential attribution disputes, that could create serious securities issues. My heart was beating faster. This was starting to sound more promising than I had dared hope. So what are my options? Thomas leaned forward. Based on what you've told me, I see several potential approaches. The most aggressive would be to file for an emergency injunction to prevent Vertex from claiming ownership of the system in their IPO filings without proper attribution and compensation. Negotiations. That would immediately bring the issue to their attention, and likely to their lawyer's attention, in a very serious way. That sounds dramatic, I said, imagining the earthquake such an action would cause at Vertex, and in Michael's career. It would be, Thomas agreed. A less confrontational approach would be to send a formal letter asserting your intellectual property rights and requesting a meeting to discuss appropriate attribution and compensation. This gives them an opportunity to address the issue privately, before it becomes a legal or regulatory matter. And if they ignore such a letter, then we would have documented their awareness of the claim before proceeding to more formal legal measures, Thomas explained. It strengthens our position if we eventually need to pursue litigation or regulatory intervention. I considered the options, thinking of Michael, of Jessica, of the $200 million valuation, of my twin bed in the basement. I think I prefer starting with the letter, I said finally. Give them a chance to do the right thing before escalating. Thomas nodded approvingly. A measured approach. I'll draft something for your review. In the meantime, organize those emails and documentation we discussed. The stronger our evidence, the more seriously they'll take the initial communication. As I left Thomas's office an hour later, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. There was a path forward, a way to claim what was rightfully mine without immediately torpedoing my son's career or creating a public spectacle. Whether Vertex would choose to take the reasonable path remained to be seen, but at least I had options beyond quiet acceptance of injustice. My phone buzzed as I waited for another rideshare. A notification from Vertex Technologies. Thank you for your application. We would like to schedule an initial interview for the Senior Manufacturing Systems Engineer position. That was fast, suspiciously so. Most companies took days or weeks to review applications and schedule interviews. Had Michael said something to accelerate the process? Or had someone at Vertex recognized my name after all? I texted Michael. Just got an interview request from Vertex. Did you have anything to do with that? His response came quickly. No. Henderson's executive assistant handles senior engineering recruitment. I haven't mentioned your application to anyone. Curiouser and curiouser. I accepted the interview invitation for the following morning, wondering what exactly I was walking into. As my rideshare arrived, I decided to go to the Lakeside Cafe rather than back to Michael's house. I needed space to think, and Linda might be available to meet for coffee and strategic planning. The cafe was quiet in the mid-afternoon lull. I settled at a window table overlooking the lake and texted Linda, who replied that she could join me in 30 minutes. While waiting, I opened my laptop and began organizing the documentation Thomas had requested. The emails showing the transition from my name to the engineering team, the original development files with their clear timestamps, the presentations I had given to Midwest management about the system's benefits. I was so absorbed in this task that I almost didn't notice when someone stopped at my table. Looking up, I was startled to see an elegantly dressed woman in her early 60s studying me with undisguised interest. "Sarah Johnson?" she asked, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being listened to. "Yes?" I replied, instinctively closing my laptop. "Eleanor Henderson," she said, extending a manicured hand. "Robert Henderson's wife. May I join you for a moment?" My mind raced. Robert Henderson's wife? Here? Now? This couldn't be coincidence. "Of course," I said, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. Eleanor Henderson sat with practiced grace, placing her designer handbag on the table between us like a small barrier. "I apologize for the unexpected approach, but when Jessica mentioned you were consulting with a lawyer today, I thought a more informal conversation might be beneficial." The pieces clicked into place. Jessica had apparently shared our basement conversation with Michael, who had either deliberately or inadvertently mentioned it to the Hendersons. "Jessica told you I was meeting with a lawyer?" I asked, keeping My voice neutral despite the surge of anger I felt at this breach of privacy. Eleanor smiled thinly. Not directly, no. But word travels in small circles. Michael and Robert have become quite close, and Robert naturally takes an interest in matters that might affect Vertex. I see, I said, equally cryptic. And what matter might that be, Mrs. Henderson? Please call me Eleanor. Her smile remained fixed, her eyes calculating. I understand you believe you had some involvement with a production system that Vertex acquired from Midwest Manufacturing, a system that has become rather important to our company's future. Some involvement, as if I'd contributed a minor suggestion, rather than created the entire system from concept to implementation. I didn't have some involvement, I corrected her. I designed and developed the integrated production optimization system in its entirety during my tenure at Midwest Manufacturing, the system that your husband is now presenting as Vertex's proprietary innovation. Eleanor's smile didn't waver, but something in her eyes hardened. That's a significant claim, Sarah, especially with Vertex's public offering approaching. It's not a claim. It's a fact, one that I can document extensively. She studied me for a moment, as if reassessing. Her approach. You must understand how these things work in corporate acquisitions. Intellectual property transfers with the company. Individual attributions become less relevant. Less convenient, you mean, I said. Especially when you're presenting acquired technology as internally developed innovation to boost IPO valuation. A flash of surprise crossed Eleanor's face. Perhaps she hadn't expected me to know about the IPO or the valuation specifics. She recovered quickly. You have a son with a promising career at Vertex, she said, changing tactics. Michael has impressed Robert tremendously. He's being groomed for senior leadership, potentially even C-suite within 5 years. The implication couldn't have been clearer. Your son's future depends on your cooperation. Are you threatening my son's career, Eleanor? I asked directly. She had the grace to look offended. Not at all. I'm merely highlighting that we're all connected in ways that merit consideration before taking precipitous actions, such as claiming rightful credit for my own work? Eleanor sighed, as if I was being deliberately obtuse. Sarah, let's be practical. What is it you actually want? If it's employment, Robert could ensure you're hired for the position you've applied for. If it's financial consideration, I'm certain we could discuss a consulting arrangement that recognizes your historical contributions. Historical contributions. As if my innovation was some archaeological artifact, rather than the current cornerstone of their production strategy. What I want, I said carefully, is proper attribution and fair compensation for the system I created. A system that your company values at $200 million for your upcoming IPO. Eleanor's perfectly composed expression flickered. The specifics valuation figure clearly surprised her. I see Michael has been sharing confidential financial projections. That's concerning. What's concerning, I countered, is a company building its public offering on intellectual property with disputed attribution. Before Eleanor could respond, Linda appeared at our table, taking in the scene with a quick, perceptive glance. Sarah, sorry I'm late, she said, though she wasn't. Her eyes fixed on Eleanor with unveiled curiosity. I didn't realize you had company. Linda, this is Eleanor Henderson, I said, watching Eleanor's reaction to the new arrival. Mrs. Henderson, Linda Martinez, my former colleague from Midwest Manufacturing. The engineering team lead, Linda added pointedly. The team that watched Sarah develop the integrated production optimization system that Vertex is now claiming as their own innovation. Eleanor's smile became brittle. How interesting. Well, I won't intrude on your reunion. Sarah, do consider what I've said. There are amicable ways to resolve these misunderstandings that benefit everyone involved. She stood, collecting her handbag. I look forward to seeing you at the interview tomorrow. Robert will be sitting in personally. He's very interested in meeting you." With that parting revelation, she departed, leaving Linda and me staring after her. "What the actual hell was that?" Linda demanded, as soon as Eleanor was out of earshot. "Robert Henderson's wife ambushed you here? And what interview tomorrow?" I quickly filled Linda in on the day's developments. The conversation with Michael about the $200 million valuation, Jessica's concern about her husband's career, my meeting with Thomas Wilson, the surprisingly fast interview invitation from Vertex, and now Eleanor Henderson's appearance and thinly veiled attempt to manage the situation. "This is getting intense," Linda said when I finished. "They're clearly worried. Eleanor wouldn't have approached you personally if they weren't taking this seriously. Which means Michael must have told Henderson something specific enough to trigger alarm bells," I mused. "Or they did recognize your name from the application and did their homework," Linda suggested. "Either way, they're circling the wagons, and using Michael's career as leverage is just dirty pool." I nodded, a cold anger settling in my chest. "They think they can manage me. Offer me a job or some consultant fee that's a fraction of what the system is worth. Pat me on the head and send me on my way. So what's your next move? Are you really going to that interview tomorrow?" I considered the question. "Yes, I think I am. But I'm also going to have Thomas Wilson expedite that letter asserting my intellectual property rights. I want it delivered before the interview." Linda grinned. "Perfect. Let them sweat a little before they face you." "Exactly. And speaking of sweating," I glanced at my watch. "I should head back to Michael's. I have a feeling there might be an uncomfortable conversation waiting for me." Linda squeezed my hand. "Stay strong. Remember what's at stake here." $200 million, give or take," I said with a wry smile. "Not just that," Linda corrected me. "Your dignity, your recognition, your rightful place as the creator of something valuable. Don't let them diminish that." When I returned to Michael's house, both he and Jessica were home, sitting in the living room with the peculiar stillness of people who have been waiting and talking about the person they're waiting for. They both looked up when I entered, Jessica's expression strained, Michael's unreadable. "So," I said, setting down my laptop bag, "I met Eleanor Henderson today. Interesting coincidence." Jessica flushed, confirming my suspicion about the information leak. Michael frowned, looking genuinely confused. "Eleanor Henderson? Robert's wife. Where?" "At the Lakeside Cafe," I replied. She seemed very concerned about my historical contributions to the integrated production optimization system. Michael's eyes widened in obvious surprise, then narrowed as he turned to Jessica. "Did you call Eleanor?" Jessica's flush deepened. "I might have mentioned to Robert that we were concerned about potential complications with Sarah's intellectual property claims." "You what?" Michael's voice rose in disbelief. "After our conversation this morning, when I specifically said we needed to tread carefully?" "I was trying to protect your relationship with Robert," Jessica protested. "I thought if I gave him a heads up, he could handle it discreetly without it affecting your position." Michael ran both hands through his hair in frustration. "So instead of being discreet, he sent his wife to ambush my mother at a cafe? That's just great, Jessica." Their marital tension was uncomfortable, but I had more pressing concerns. "Michael, Eleanor mentioned that Robert Henderson will be personally attending my interview tomorrow. Did you know about that?" He shook his head, still visibly agitated. "No, I didn't. But it doesn't surprise me now. They're trying to assess how serious this situation is." "It's serious," I confirmed. "I met with Thomas Wilson today, Laura's husband, the intellectual property attorney. He believes I have a strong case, especially given the IPO considerations." Michael grew very still. "What are you planning to do?" "For starters, Thomas is sending a formal letter to Vertex tomorrow morning, asserting my intellectual property rights and requesting a meeting to discuss proper attribution and compensation." "A letter," Jessica repeated faintly. "To Vertex's legal department?" about the system they're featuring in their IPO. Yes, I said simply. It gives them an opportunity to address the issue privately before it potentially becomes a regulatory matter. Michael was silent, his expression caught between concern and something that looked unexpectedly like respect. Finally, he said, "That's actually pretty reasonable. A letter creates a paper trail without immediately escalating to litigation." I hadn't expected his approval, mild as it was. "I'm not looking to create problems for you, Michael, but I can't ignore what's happening either." He nodded slowly. "I understand. And Mom, for what it's worth, after seeing your documentation, after hearing about the valuation projections, you deserve recognition for what you created, and fair compensation." Jessica stared at her husband in obvious surprise. "Michael, what are you saying? This could affect your entire career trajectory." "Maybe," he acknowledged. "Or maybe it's an opportunity to demonstrate integrity. Vertex needs my mother's system. If I help facilitate a fair resolution, that could actually strengthen my position long term." It was my turn to be surprised. This was a maturity and ethical clarity I hadn't seen from Michael in recent interactions. Perhaps being forced to confront the disconnect between his career success and my basement accommodations had triggered some reflection. "So, what happens now?" Jessica asked, looking between us with uncertainty. "Now," I said, "I prepare for my interview tomorrow with Robert Henderson, and we wait to see how Vertex responds to the letter from Thomas Wilson." Michael considered this. "If Henderson is personally attending your interview, they're taking this very seriously. He'll probably try to gauge how far you're willing to push this." "Probably," I agreed. "Any advice for dealing with your mentor?" A small smile tugged at Michael's lips, the first genuine one I'd seen since arriving at his house. "Be confident. Henderson respects people who stand their ground. And Mom? Maybe don't mention that you're currently sleeping in a basement, because you helped with our down payment. That might not reflect well on his mentee's character." "I'll keep that detail to myself," I promised, returning his smile. That night, as I prepared for bed in the basement bathroom, I found myself contemplating the strange turn of events. In just 24 hours, I had gone from an unemployed burden in my son's basement to someone whose work was valuable enough that the wife of a CEO would track me down for an unofficial negotiation. My son, who had been treating me with thinly veiled impatience, was now acknowledging my professional worth and even offering strategic advice. All because I had proof of my value, proof that others recognized. As I slipped into the twin bed, pulling the blanket around me against the basement chill, I thought about the interview tomorrow. Robert Henderson would try to diminish my contribution, offer some token recognition, perhaps an inadequate financial settlement. He would apply pressure through concerns about Michael's career, appeal to team spirit, use whatever leverage he thought might work. But I had something he needed, irrefutable proof that I had created the system his company was building its future upon. And for the first time in a long time, that knowledge gave me power. Tomorrow would be a turning point, one way or another. Either the beginning of a fair resolution or the start of a more difficult battle. Either way, I was ready. I fell asleep thinking not of my basement accommodations or my uncertain employment prospects, but of the system I had created, the elegant solutions to complex problems, the innovations that had revolutionized production processes, the work that represented the culmination of my knowledge and experience, work that was worth fighting for, no matter what pressures came my way. The Vertex Technologies headquarters dominated the Cleveland skyline, all glass and steel rising 40 stories above the city. As my rideshare pulled up to the entrance, I smoothed my navy blue blazer, the most professional item I'd packed when moving out of my house, and checked my phone one last time. Thomas Wilson had confirmed that his letter asserting my intellectual property rights had been delivered to Vertex's legal department at 8:00 a.m. sharp, an hour before my scheduled interview. Perfect timing, just enough for the letter to reach the right people but not quite enough time for them to formulate a comprehensive strategy. Robert Henderson would be walking into our meeting aware of my claims, but without a fully developed response. The momentary disorientation might work to my advantage. The lobby was a vast space of polished marble and recessed lighting, with a sleek reception desk staffed by two impeccably dressed young people. I approached, feeling remarkably calm given the significance of the meeting ahead. "Sarah Johnson," I stated. "I have an interview at 9 o'clock. "Of course, Ms. Johnson," the receptionist replied after checking her screen. "You're expected in the executive conference room, 40th floor." She handed me a visitor badge. "Security will escort you." The security guard who materialized at my side was polite but reserved as we rode the elevator to the top floor. The 40th floor, executive territory. Not the usual venue for engineering interviews, which confirmed what I already suspected. This meeting was about much more than a potential job. The executive conference room took full advantage of its top-floor location, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Lake Erie and the city below. A long table of dark walnut dominated the space, with perhaps 20 leather chairs arranged around it. At the far end stood Robert Henderson himself, his back to the door as he gazed out at the view. He turned as I entered, revealing a man in his early 60s with silver hair and the confident posture of someone accustomed to authority. His expression was pleasant but evaluating, taking my measure before he stepped forward with an extended hand. "Ms. Johnson," he said, his voice carrying the slight roughness of a former smoker. "I'm Robert Henderson. Thank you for coming in today." I shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for the interview, Mr. Henderson. Though I admit I'm surprised the CEO would personally attend a senior engineering interview." A thin smile crossed his face. "I like to be involved when we're considering key technical positions, especially when the candidate has such an interesting background." So he knew. "Good. May I offer you coffee, water?" he asked, gesturing to a side table where a carafe and glasses were arranged. "Coffee would be great," I replied, taking the opportunity to gather my thoughts as he poured 2 cups. He handed me one, then indicated we should sit, not at opposite ends of the long table as I'd expected, but at adjacent sides of one corner. A more intimate arrangement, less confrontational, a deliberate choice, no doubt. "So, Ms. Johnson," he began, setting his cup down precisely. "Your application was quite impressive. 20 years at Midwest Manufacturing, rising to production manager. Specialized expertise in manufacturing optimization systems. You seem exceptionally qualified for the position." "I believe I am," I agreed calmly. "There's just one thing that puzzles me," Henderson continued, his tone conversational. "Why would someone with your experience and qualifications be interested in joining Vertex now? Especially given that we acquired Midwest and subsequently restructured certain departments, including yours." This was it, the opening gambit. An invitation to show my cards. "That's a fair question," I acknowledged. "I applied because I was told Vertex is implementing a manufacturing optimization system across its divisions, a system I'm intimately familiar with." Henderson's expression remained neutral, but I noticed his fingers tighten slightly around his coffee cup. "You're referring to our integrated production optimization system." "I am," I confirmed. "Though I usually just call it my system since I designed and developed it from concept to implementation during my time at Midwest Manufacturing." There it was, the claim laid directly on the table between us. Henderson didn't flinch, but a muscle twitched almost imperceptibly near his left eye. "Your system," he repeated, his voice carefully measured. "That's a significant assertion, Ms. Johnson. Vertex acquired all intellectual property from Midwest as part of our purchase agreement, including the production system you're referring to. Our understanding is that it was developed by Midwest's engineering team." "That particular attribution was a relatively late revision," I said evenly. Originally, the system was clearly identified as my creation in all internal documents. I have extensive documentation establishing my sole authorship, including the original concept papers, development logs, implementation plans, and early communication where my name is explicitly listed as the creator. Henderson took a slow sip of his coffee, studying me over the rim of his cup. I see. And I understand our legal department received a letter from your attorney this morning regarding this matter. They did, I confirmed. I believe in addressing issues directly and transparently, Mr. Henderson. He set his cup down with deliberate care. As do I, Ms. Johnson. So let me be direct. What exactly are you hoping to achieve here? Two things, I replied without hesitation. Proper attribution for the system I created, and fair compensation for its use and implementation across Vertex's divisions. And if we were to hire you for this senior engineering position, would that satisfy your requirements? I smiled, appreciating the transparent attempt to resolve the situation cheaply. The position I applied for pays what, $150,000 annually, plus benefits? Mr. Henderson, we both know that my system is being valued at approximately $200 million for your upcoming IPO. A job offer, while welcome, hardly constitutes fair compensation for intellectual property of that value. Henderson's expression flickered with genuine surprise before he regained his composure. You seem remarkably well informed about our internal valuations, Ms. Johnson. I did my homework before this meeting, I replied, leaving Michael's role in providing that information deliberately vague. Just as I'm sure you did yours before meeting with me? Indeed. He leaned back slightly, reassessing me. So what would constitute fair compensation in your view? A meaningful percentage of the system's valuation. Recognition as the original creator in all company materials and presentations about the system. And yes, a technical leadership position that allows me to guide the continued evolution of the system I designed. Henderson's eyebrows rose. That's ambitious. It's proportionate to the value I created, I countered. Value that Vertex is currently presenting to investors as its own innovation. He was silent for a moment, his expression calculating. Then he said, You know, you remind me a bit of your son. The abrupt change of subject caught me off guard. Michael? Yes. He has the same directness, the same quiet confidence. He's becoming quite an asset to our executive team. Henderson's implication was clear. Michael's promising future at Vertex could be collateral damage in this dispute. I'm glad to hear you value his contributions, I replied carefully. I raised him to stand up for himself and to value his work appropriately. I'm trying to model that same principle now. Henderson's expression shifted to something almost like respect. Touché, Ms. Johnson. He stood suddenly. Walk with me. Surprised by the request, I followed him out of the conference room and down a corridor lined with glass-walled offices. Staff members glanced up curiously as the CEO passed with an unknown visitor in tow. Henderson stopped at a large interior window overlooking the main production floor, 40 stories below us, but visible through a central atrium that ran the height of the building. What do you see down there? He asked. I looked at the bustling production floor, immediately recognizing the layout and workflow patterns. I see my system in action, I answered honestly. The parallel processing stations, the digital integration points, the optimized material flow pathways, that's all from my original design. Henderson nodded slowly. Yes, it is. And it's been extraordinarily effective. Production costs down 37%, output up 22%, defect rates cut in half. Those aren't just numbers, Ms. Johnson. They translate to jobs secured, healthcare benefits maintained, competitive advantages in challenging markets. I understood his point. My system had value beyond its dollar figure. It supported livelihoods and created stability for workers. He was appealing to my sense of greater purpose, trying to make me feel selfish for seeking personal recognition and compensation. I'm glad my work has had positive impacts beyond the bottom line, I said. That was always my intention. But those benefits don't negate my right to recognition and fair compensation. In fact, they underscore the value I created. Henderson turned from the window to face me directly. Let me be candid, Ms. Johnson. Your claim comes at an extremely sensitive time for Vertex. Our IPO filing is progressing, with regulatory reviews already underway. Any dispute over key intellectual property assets could derail that process, potentially, costing the company billions in market valuation. I understand the timing is inconvenient, I acknowledged. But that doesn't change the facts of the situation. No, it doesn't, he agreed surprisingly. Which leaves us with a choice: a protracted legal battle that could harm Vertex, damage your son's career, and leave all parties diminished, or a negotiated solution that recognizes your contribution while allowing Vertex to move forward with confidence. I prefer the latter, I said. As my letter indicated, I'm open to reasonable discussions. Henderson checked his watch. My executive team is gathering for our morning briefing in 15 minutes. I'd like you to join us. The invitation startled me. Your executive team meeting? Why? Because if we're going to address this situation constructively, key stakeholders should hear directly from you rather than receiving filtered information. And because I think seeing the system's creator might offer valuable perspective to our leadership. It was an unexpected move, but a strategic one. Henderson was calling my bluff. If I truly believed in my claim, I should be willing to state it publicly to his executive team, including my son. It also suggested he was taking my claim more seriously than I had anticipated. I'd be happy to join your meeting, I said confidently. Henderson nodded once, seemingly satisfied with my response. Excellent. Let's head to the boardroom. As we walked, he asked casually, "How are you finding your living arrangements? Michael mentioned you're staying with him temporarily." The question caught me off guard. Was he fishing for information, trying to gauge my personal circumstances and potential financial desperation? Or was this just small talk? It's a generous accommodation while I'm in transition, I replied, neutrally, though the basement gets a bit chilly at night. Henderson glanced at me sharply. Basement? Michael has you staying in his basement? I immediately regretted the slip. It's a finished space, I said quickly, not wanting to cast Michael in a negative light. Perfectly comfortable. A strange expression crossed Henderson's face, something between disbelief and displeasure, before he masked it with a professional smile as we approached the boardroom doors. Here we are. The Vertex executive boardroom was even more impressive than the conference room where we'd started our conversation. A massive oval table dominated the space, with perhaps 20 leather chairs arranged around it, most already occupied by men and women in business attire. Conversations ceased as Henderson entered, all eyes turning to him, then shifting curiously to me. Michael was seated midway down the table. His eyes widened in shock when he saw me, then darted to Henderson with obvious alarm. He hadn't expected this development. "Good morning, everyone," Henderson said smoothly, gesturing for me to take an empty seat near the head of the table, directly across from Michael. Before we begin our regular agenda, I'd like to introduce Sarah Johnson. Ms. Johnson has applied for our Senior Manufacturing Systems Engineer position, but more relevantly to our discussions today, she has made a compelling case that she was the original creator of the Integrated Production Optimization System during her tenure at Midwest Manufacturing. A ripple of murmurs and exchanged glances swept around the table. Michael remained perfectly still, his expression carefully neutral, though I could see tension in his shoulders. "As you all know," Henderson continued, "this system is central to our production strategy and features prominently in our IPO materials. Ms. Johnson has provided substantial documentation supporting her claim of authorship, and her attorney has formally contacted our legal department this morning. A sharp-featured woman near Henderson's right hand, the company's legal counsel, I presumed, nodded tightly, confirming receipt of Thomas Wilson's letter. "I've invited Ms. Johnson to join us this morning because I believe in addressing challenges directly," Henderson explained, "and because I thought it might be valuable for all of you to hear firsthand from the person who apparently designed the system that's transforming our manufacturing divisions." All eyes turned to me, expressions ranging from skepticism to curiosity to poorly concealed alarm. I sat straighter, drawing on decades of presenting technical information in male-dominated rooms. "Thank you for the introduction, Mr. Henderson," I began, my voice steady. "As some of you may know, I worked at Midwest Manufacturing for 20 years before the acquisition and restructuring. During that time, I identified critical inefficiencies in our production processes and developed what's now called the Integrated Production Optimization System to address them." I continued for several minutes, explaining the core architecture of the system and the specific innovations that made it effective. I used technical language precisely, demonstrating intimate knowledge of the system's inner workings in ways that no casual observer could replicate. As I spoke, I noticed expressions shifting around the table, skepticism giving way to recognition that I genuinely understood this system at its deepest levels. When I finished my brief overview, Henderson opened the floor for questions. They came rapidly, each more technical than the last, testing the depth of my knowledge. I answered each one comprehensively, occasionally suggesting improvements to current implementations that revealed my thorough understanding of not just what the system did, but why it worked the way it did. Throughout this impromptu examination, Michael remained silent, watching the dynamic unfold. His expression had shifted from alarm to something more complex, perhaps pride mingled with concern. Finally, Henderson raised a hand, ending the technical interrogation. "I think it's clear Ms. Johnson has intimate knowledge of the system's architecture and implementation. The question before us is how to address her authorship claim appropriately, while maintaining our strategic momentum and IPO timeline." The legal counsel, introduced as Victoria Winters, spoke up immediately. "We should move this to a closed legal discussion. Having Ms. Johnson present while we discuss potential settlement strategies is inappropriate." Henderson nodded. "A fair point. Ms. Johnson, thank you for joining us this morning. Would you mind waiting in my office while we discuss next steps? My assistant will show you the way." I stood, gathering my notes. "Of course. But before I go, I want to clarify something important. I'm not looking to disrupt Vertex's operations or IPO. I'm seeking appropriate recognition and compensation for work that's clearly valuable to your company. I believe there's a path forward that benefits all parties involved." As I followed Henderson's assistant out, I caught Michael's eye briefly. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. Whether of support, acknowledgement, or something else, I wasn't sure. Henderson's office was a corner space with commanding views and modern minimalist decor. His assistant offered me coffee and then left me alone with my thoughts. Through the glass walls, I could see the executive team engaged in animated discussion, with occasional glances in my direction. Michael was speaking now, his expression serious as he addressed the group. I wondered what he was saying. Was he confirming my claims? Distancing himself from the situation? Trying to broker a compromise? The distance and soundproofing made it impossible to tell. After nearly 40 minutes, the door opened and Henderson returned, followed by Victoria Winters and, surprisingly, Michael. All three looked serious, but not hostile, a promising sign. "Ms. Johnson," Henderson began as they took seats around a small conference table in the corner of his office. "We've had a productive discussion about your claims and potential ways forward. Before we outline our thoughts, I want to thank you for bringing this matter to our attention directly, rather than proceeding immediately to more adversarial legal channels." I nodded, appreciating the acknowledgement. "I prefer direct communication when possible." "As do I," Henderson agreed. Victoria will outline our proposed approach. The legal counsel opened a leather portfolio. Ms. Johnson, after reviewing the situation, we're prepared to acknowledge your significant contribution to the development of the integrated production optimization system. We propose the following. First, formal recognition as the system's primary architect in all future company materials and presentations. Second, a consulting position that would allow you to guide the system's continued evolution while maintaining separation from day-to-day operations if you prefer. Third, financial compensation in the form of a one-time payment of $5 million, plus a 0.5% royalty on all production, utilizing the system for a period of 10 years. I kept my expression neutral despite my surprise at the substantial offer. They were taking this seriously indeed. Far more seriously than Eleanor Henderson's cafe approach had suggested. But the numbers still didn't align with the system's reported valuation. That's a thoughtful starting point, I said carefully. But given the system's $200 million valuation in your IPO materials and its critical role in Vertex's future growth strategy, the proposed compensation seems disproportionately low. Victoria's expression tightened, but Henderson raised a hand. Before she could respond, "What would you consider proportionate, Ms. Johnson?" "A 3% royalty at minimum, extending for the life of the system's use, not just 10 years, and a one-time payment of $15 million to compensate for the years of use without attribution since the acquisition of Midwest." Victoria shook her head immediately. "Those numbers are negotiable," Henderson interrupted smoothly. "As are yours, I'm sure. Perhaps we could meet in the middle, a 1.5% royalty for 15 years and a one-time payment of $10 million. I considered this revised offer. It was substantially better than their opening position and would provide financial security far beyond what I'd ever anticipated. But something was still missing. The financial terms are moving in the right direction, I acknowledged. But there's another element that needs to be addressed. My role going forward. The consulting position you've suggested lacks specificity. I would want a formal title reflecting my status as the system's architect and a clear mandate to guide its continued development. Henderson glanced at Michael, who had remained silent until now. "What are your thoughts, Michael? You'd be working closely with Ms. Johnson in this capacity." My son straightened slightly, meeting my eyes directly for the first time since entering the room. "I think we'd be fortunate to have the system's original architect guiding its evolution. Mom's technical expertise would be an asset to our implementation team, and her perspective could identify optimization opportunities we've missed." His use of Mom rather than Ms. Johnson was deliberate, acknowledging our relationship openly rather than maintaining the awkward professional distance of our earlier interactions. I felt a surge of unexpected emotion at this small but significant gesture. Henderson nodded thoughtfully. "What about Chief Architectural Consultant for Manufacturing Optimization Systems, with direct reporting lines to both the CTO and COO, and quarterly presentations to the executive team on system performance and potential enhancements?" It was a meaningful role, not a token position or a way to silence me, but a genuine opportunity to guide the continued development of my system. That would be acceptable, I agreed, provided the role includes authority to recommend and implement improvements. It would, Henderson confirmed. So we have the outlines of an agreement, formal recognition as the system's primary architect, a substantive consulting position with real authority, financial compensation at levels we can continue to refine with our respective legal teams. He glanced at Victoria, who nodded reluctantly. "Is this framework acceptable to you, Ms. Johnson?" I considered the offer carefully. It represented significant recognition of my contribution, both financially and professionally. More importantly, it acknowledged my rightful place as the system's creator and ensured I would have a voice in its future development. "Yes," I said finally. "I believe we can work with this framework. I'll have Thomas Wilson coordinate with Ms. Winters on the specific terms. Excellent, Henderson said, rising to signal the meeting's conclusion. I appreciate your reasonable approach to this situation, Ms. Johnson. Many in your position might have taken a more adversarial path. As we shook hands, Henderson added, casually, and regarding your current living situation, I believe Vertex maintains several executive apartments for visiting personnel. Perhaps one might be available while you're in transition. I'll have HR look into it immediately. I glanced at Michael, whose expression combined embarrassment and relief. That's very generous, but not necessary, I replied. My stay with Michael is temporary while I secure my own arrangements. Of course, Henderson said smoothly. The offer remains open should you change your mind. After finalizing next steps, with Victoria regarding the formal agreement, I found myself alone with Michael as we walked toward the elevators. He was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "You were impressive in there. I've never seen Henderson revise an offer so substantially. In a first meeting." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely touched by his compliment. "And thank you for supporting my position with the executive team. I know that couldn't have been easy." Michael pressed the elevator call button, his expression thoughtful. "It was actually easier than I expected. Once I saw how clearly you could demonstrate your creation of the system, supporting you was the only ethical choice." He hesitated, then added, "I should have recognized your contribution sooner. I heard you talk about that system for years while you were developing it. I guess I compartmentalized work and family so completely that I never made the connection until now." The elevator arrived, and we stepped inside. As the doors closed, Michael turned to face me directly. "Mom, I owe you an apology, not just for failing to recognize your work, but for the basement, for the way Jessica and I have been treating you. It wasn't right." The frankness of his apology caught me off guard. "Thank you for saying that, Michael. When we get home, we're moving you upstairs to the guest room," he continued firmly. "It should have been yours from the beginning." As the elevator descended toward the lobby, I felt as though weights were being lifted from my shoulders with each floor we passed. In the space of a morning, I had gone from an unemployed engineer sleeping in her son's basement to the recognized creator of a $200 million system with a substantial compensation package and meaningful professional role on the horizon. But more important than the financial and professional recognition was the shift in my relationship with Michael. He was seeing me again, not as an aging parent who needed accommodation, but as a skilled professional whose work commanded respect. The basement bedroom had been a symptom of a deeper problem. He had stopped seeing my value. Today had changed that fundamentally. "There's one more thing," Michael said as we reached the lobby. Henderson pulled me aside briefly before we joined. "You in his office, he was displeased about your basement accommodations, especially after learning you had helped with our down payment." I winced. "I shouldn't have mentioned that. I didn't mean to make you look bad." "No, you were right to mention it," Michael insisted. "It was a reality check I apparently needed." He hesitated, then added, "Henderson said something that struck me. He said, 'The way we treat those who built the foundations we stand on reveals more about our character than any corporate achievement.'" The words hung between us as we exited the building into the bright Cleveland morning. Foundations we stand on. It was an apt metaphor, not just for my system that now underpinned Vertex's operations, but for the parental support that had helped establish Michael's career and home. "So," I said as we paused on the sidewalk, "what happens now?" Michael smiled, a genuine, warm smile, unlike his strained expressions of recent weeks. "Now, we go home and move you upstairs where you belong. And then, I think we have some lost time to make up for. Maybe I could take you to dinner? Somewhere nice to celebrate your new position as chief architectural consultant?" "I'd like that," I replied, returning his smile. "And Michael, thank you for standing up for what's right today. even when it was uncomfortable. As we walked toward the parking garage, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. 3 weeks ago, losing my job had seemed like the end of my professional life, a final confirmation that my value had diminished with age. Now, that same job loss had led to greater recognition, compensation, and professional opportunity than I'd ever achieved at Midwest. More importantly, it had created an unexpected reset in my relationship with my son, a chance to rebuild on foundations of mutual respect rather than obligation and convenience. The basement bedroom had been a symptom of how he saw me. The guest room upstairs represented a new understanding of my worth, both as a professional and as his mother. We had both learned valuable lessons about recognizing the true value of contributions, mine to my field and mine to his life. As we drove away from Vertex headquarters, I found myself looking forward rather than back, anticipating not just my new professional role, but the strengthened relationship with my son that had emerged from this unexpected challenge. The basement chapter was closing. What opened before me now was a future built on recognition, respect, and restored dignity. One where my contributions, both professional and personal, were finally receiving their due acknowledgement. The guest bedroom was a revelation after 3 weeks in the basement, spacious, bright, with a queen-sized bed and an ensuite bathroom featuring actual water pressure. As I unpacked my belongings into the cherry wood dresser, I marveled at how quickly circumstances could change. Just 48 hours ago, I had been the unwelcome occupant of a basement storage space. Now, I was moving upstairs with an executive, title, a substantial compensation package in negotiation, and a restored sense of professional dignity. "Is there anything else you need, Mom?" Michael asked from the doorway, his demeanor markedly different from the cool efficiency with which he had initially shown me the basement accommodations. "This is perfect," I assured him, placing my framed engineering degree on the nightstand. A small gesture of reclaiming my professional identity. Michael lingered, seeming to want to say more. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Jessica's preparing dinner. She's making her special lasagna, the one with the 4 cheeses." The unspoken message was clear. An olive branch, an attempt to reset our relationship in light of the day's revelations. "Sounds wonderful," I replied. "I'll be down soon." Michael nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "Henderson called me after you left. He said the legal team is expediting your agreement. They want to finalize everything before the SEC filing next week." "That's fast," I observed. "They're motivated," Michael acknowledged with a slight smile. Having a disputed intellectual property asset heading into an IPO is basically their worst nightmare. But also, I think Henderson genuinely respects what you accomplished. He mentioned that your technical explanations in the executive meeting were more comprehensive than anything the integration team has produced in 2 years. The compliment warmed me unexpectedly. After decades of having my work overlooked or attributed to teams rather than to me individually, explicit recognition of my expertise felt like water after a long drought. "Thank you for telling me that," I said. Michael hesitated again, discomfort evident in his posture. "There's something else. Henderson asked about the down payment, how much we borrowed from you for this house." I waved a dismissive hand. "That's not relevant to the current negotiations. It was a family matter." "It was $50,000, Michael stated flatly. "A third of our down payment. Money you could have kept for your retirement security." His voice tightened. "And then we put you in the basement when you needed help." The naked recognition of the situation's unfairness was more healing than any apology could have been. "We're moving forward now," I said gently. "That's what matters." After Michael left, I sat on the edge of the comfortable queen bed, taking a moment to absorb the whirlwind of changes. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "Update me now. What happened with Henderson? Did they cave?" I smiled at her characteristic directness. "Not exactly a cave, More like a strategic realignment, I typed back. Details over coffee tomorrow. But I've been promoted from basement dweller to honored guest with an executive title in the works. Linda's response came seconds later. I knew you'd crush them. Details tomorrow. When I went downstairs for dinner, I found the dining room transformed. The table was set with the good china, the pieces usually reserved for special occasions, and a bottle of expensive Cabernet stood open, breathing. Jessica was arranging fresh flowers in a crystal vase, her expression a mixture of determination and discomfort. Sarah, she said, looking up as I entered. I hope you like lasagna. It's my grandmother's recipe. It smells wonderful, I replied. The tension between us was palpable, but there was also a genuine effort toward reconciliation in her careful preparations. Michael told me about what happened at Vertex today, she continued, adjusting a bloom unnecessarily. About your system and the agreement they're offering. Congratulations. The congratulations seemed to cost her something, but she offered it nonetheless, progress of a sort. Thank you, I said simply. He also said we're providing an executive apartment for you, she added, her tone carefully neutral. Until you decide on your next move. I raised an eyebrow at this new information. That's news to me. Henderson insisted, Michael explained, entering with a basket of garlic bread. He said it's standard for executive consultants, especially those designing critical systems for the company. The apartment is in that new building near the cultural district, the one with the rooftop garden and doorman. He set the bread on the table. It's available whenever you're ready, but of course you're welcome to stay here as long as you like. The offer of an executive apartment was unexpected, but not unwelcome. As much as Michael and Jessica seemed committed to improving our living arrangement, having my own space again would be ideal, especially as I navigated my new professional role. That's very generous, I said. I'll think about the timing. Dinner was surprisingly pleasant, the awkwardness of our previous meals replaced by a new dynamic. Michael shared details about Vertex's upcoming projects, genuinely seeking my technical input rather than treating me as an uninformed outsider. Jessica, while not completely at ease, made visible efforts to engage me in conversation about my career and experiences. I never realized the scope of what you accomplished at Midwest, she admitted as we finished the main course. Michael always described you as an engineer, but he never mentioned you designed entire production systems. To be fair, I didn't talk about work that much when visiting, I acknowledged. And the attribution issues meant my role wasn't always obvious from outside. Still, Jessica persisted, refilling my wine glass, creating a system valued at $200 million, that's extraordinary. I wish I'd known. I might have asked for your advice on my business models. She offered a tentative smile. I've been trying to optimize my client management system for years. Never occurred to me there was an expert in the family. The acknowledgement of my expertise, small as it was, felt significant coming from Jessica. For the first time, she was seeing me as someone with valuable knowledge, rather than simply as Michael's aging mother. I'd be happy to take a look at your system sometime, I offered. Optimization principles apply across industries, even in real estate. The conversation flowed more easily after that, and by the time we finished dessert, a delicious tiramisu that Jessica had apparently rushed out to purchase from an upscale Italian bakery during the afternoon, the atmosphere had transformed, from the strained formality of previous meals to something approaching genuine family interaction. As I helped clear the dishes, Michael's phone rang. He checked the screen and frowned slightly. It's Henderson. I should take this. He stepped into his home office, closing the door behind him. Jessica and I continued tidying the kitchen in surprisingly comfortable silence. Eventually, she said, I owe you an apology, Sarah, for the basement, for how we've treated you since you arrived. It wasn't right. Thank you, I said, appreciating her directness. It's been a difficult adjustment, For all of us. She nodded, wiping down the counter with more attention than it required. When Michael told me you needed to stay with us, I reacted badly. I was worried about our space, our routines, our privacy. She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. But that's no excuse for putting you in the basement or treating you like an inconvenience rather than family. The simple acknowledgement meant more than any elaborate apology could have. We're finding a better way forward now, I offered. That's what matters. Jessica hesitated, then asked, Is it true that you helped with the down payment for this house? I hadn't expected Michael to share that detail with her. Yes, about a third of it. Michael was determined to buy in this neighborhood, and property values had jumped that year. Something like shame crossed Jessica's features. I didn't know. Michael told me it came from his savings. She gestured around the kitchen, at the expensive appliances, the custom cabinetry. And then we put you in the basement when you needed help. The irony clearly wasn't lost on her. Before I could respond, Michael emerged from his office, his expression serious. That was Henderson, he said. The legal team has completed the draft agreement. They want to meet tomorrow to finalize the terms. He glanced between Jessica and me, sensing he'd interrupted something. Is everything okay? Just clearing the air, Jessica said, offering me a small smile. Long overdue. That night, in the comfort of the guest room with its plush bedding and proper heating, I found myself reflecting on the strange path that had brought me here. Losing my job had seemed like an ending, the final evidence that my professional value had an expiration date tied to my age. Instead, it had become the catalyst for reclaiming not just the recognition for my work, but also a more authentic relationship with my son and daughter-in-law. My phone buzzed with an email from Thomas Wilson. The subject line read simply, Draft. Agreement. Urgent review required. I opened it immediately, scanning through the formal legal language that outlined the terms we had discussed in Henderson's office, with additional details elaborated. The recognition was comprehensive. My name would appear as the system's primary architect in all company materials, presentations, and regulatory filings. The financial terms matched our verbal agreement: a one-time payment of $10 million and a 1.5% royalty on all production utilizing the system for 15 years. The role of chief architectural consultant came with substantial authority over the system's continued development and a compensation package commensurate with senior executive positions. It was more than I had ever imagined possible just days ago, when I was applying for positions that didn't even acknowledge my specialized expertise and facing rejection after rejection based on unstated but obvious age considerations. I sent Wilson a brief reply. Terms appear consistent with our discussions. We'll review thoroughly in the morning before our meeting. The next day dawned bright and clear. I dressed with particular care in my most professional outfit, now hanging in a proper closet rather than folded in a basement dresser, and went downstairs to find Michael already in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee and checking emails on his tablet. Morning, he greeted me, looking up. Sleep better in the guest room? Much, I acknowledged, pouring myself coffee, though I keep thinking of it as the room I should have been in from the start. Michael winced slightly. Fair enough. He set down his tablet. Henderson sent over a car service for you. It should be here at 9:30 to take you to the meeting with the legal team. A car service? I raised an eyebrow. That's a step up from my usual rideshare. They're rolling out the red carpet, Michael observed with a slight smile. Amazing what a $200 million intellectual property claim will do for your transportation options. His humor was a welcome change from the strained interactions of previous weeks. And here I thought it was just my charming personality, I replied, dryly. Michael's expression turned more serious. Wilson will be at the meeting? Yes, he's reviewing the draft agreement this morning and will meet me there. I sipped my coffee. Will you be attending? He shook his head. Henderson thought it would be cleaner if I wasn't directly involved in the negotiations, given our relationship, but he's keeping me updated. He hesitated. Mom, before you finalize everything, are you sure this is what you want? The financial terms are substantial, but you'd be tying yourself to Vertex for the foreseeable future. I considered his question carefully. I'm creating the terms of that connection, Michael. Not as an employee dependent on the company's goodwill, but as the recognized creator of a system they depend on. That's a very different power dynamic than what I experienced at Midwest. True, he acknowledged. I just want to make sure you're not settling for less than you deserve. His concern for my interests, so different from his earlier dismissiveness, warmed me. The agreement reflects fair value for my contribution, I assured him. And more importantly, it establishes proper recognition moving forward. That's worth as much to me as the financial terms. At precisely 9:30, a sleek black car pulled into the driveway. The driver, professionally attired and courteous, held the door for me as if I were already the executive my new title suggested. Your attorney will meet you at Vertex headquarters, Ms. Johnson, he informed me as we pulled away from Michael's house. Mr. Henderson asked me to provide you with this in the meantime. He handed back a leather portfolio embossed with the Vertex logo. Inside was a printed copy of the draft agreement, along with a handwritten note from Henderson. Ms. Johnson, looking forward to finalizing our agreement and welcoming you formally to the Vertex team. The enclosed key card is for your executive apartment, which is ready whenever you wish to inspect it. RH. Beneath the note was a security key card and an address in the Cultural District, one of Cleveland's most desirable areas, with galleries, upscale restaurants, and boutique shops within walking distance. The apartment was real, not just a theoretical possibility, and it was already available. Henderson was certainly moving quickly to secure my cooperation. The legal meeting was held not in the intimidating boardroom of the previous day, but in a comfortable conference room with lake views. Victoria Winters was already there with 2 other attorneys from Vertex's legal team, as was Thomas Wilson, who rose to greet me as I entered. Sarah, he said warmly, shaking my hand, I've been reviewing the agreement in detail this morning. It's comprehensive and largely aligned with what we discussed yesterday. Victoria nodded crisply. We've made every effort to address the key points raised in our preliminary discussions. Of course, there may be specific language adjustments you'd like to suggest. The next 3 hours were devoted to a meticulous review of the agreement, with Wilson advocating for clarifications or enhancements to certain provisions, while Victoria and her team explained the company's positions. The tone remained professional, but not adversarial, both sides clearly motivated to reach a mutually acceptable conclusion. By early afternoon, we had a final document that satisfied all parties. I would be recognized as the primary architect of the integrated production optimization system in all company materials, receive substantial financial compensation for both past and future use of the system, and hold a meaningful consultative role in its continued development. I believe we have an agreement, Wilson said, reviewing the final changes. Sarah, do you have any remaining concerns before we proceed to signatures? I shook my head, a sense of quiet satisfaction settling over me. The terms are fair and comprehensive. I'm ready to move forward. Victoria smiled, her first genuine expression since our negotiations began. Excellent. Mr. Henderson would like to join us for the formal signing if that's acceptable. He's been waiting for our confirmation. Minutes later, Robert Henderson entered the conference room, bringing with him an air of decisive authority. He reviewed the key points of the agreement with obvious approval, then turned to me with an extended hand. Ms. Johnson, I believe this represents a fair resolution that honors your contribution while securing Vertex's continued growth. I'm pleased we could reach this agreement without resorting to more adversarial measures. As am I I replied, shaking his hand firmly. Recognition of intellectual contribution should be straightforward, though unfortunately it often isn't in corporate environments. A reality I hope to improve at Vertex, Henderson said, with what seemed like genuine conviction. Innovation thrives when properly attributed and rewarded. The signing itself was brief but significant. My name on documents that formally acknowledged my creation of a system valued at $200 million, that secured my financial future, and that established my role as an ongoing contributor to its evolution. As the Vertex attorneys gathered the signed documents, Henderson turned to me with an unexpected question. "Have you had a chance to visit the apartment yet?" "Not yet," I replied, though I appreciate the prompt arrangement. "The building has excellent security and amenities," he continued. "Many of our executives maintain residences there for convenience to our downtown campus. The unit we've secured for you is on the 17th floor, one of the corner apartments with dual exposures." His detailed knowledge of the accommodation surprised me. "You seem very familiar with the building." Henderson smiled slightly. "My wife and I lived there briefly while our home was being renovated. Eleanor specifically recommended this unit when I mentioned we needed executive housing for you." He paused, his expression becoming more serious. "She asked me to convey her apologies for her approach at the cafe. She meant well, but acknowledges it was perhaps less than ideal." The diplomatic phrasing made me smile. "Please tell her the apology is accepted. We were all navigating unfamiliar territory." "Indeed." Henderson checked his watch. "If you're amenable, I've arranged for the car service to take you to see the apartment after we conclude here. My assistant can meet you there with the full key set and building information." The offer was tempting, a chance to see my new accommodations and perhaps begin planning a swift exit from Michael's house despite the recent improvements to my living situation there. But something in Henderson's two perfect arrangements gave me pause. "Actually," I said, "I'd prefer to visit the apartment with my son, if that's not a problem. Perhaps tomorrow, or over the weekend." A flicker of surprise crossed Henderson's face, quickly masked. "Of course. The apartment is secured for you indefinitely as part of your consulting arrangement. There's no rush." After the meeting concluded and the documents were processed, I found myself once again in the back seat of the luxury car service, heading back to Michael's house with a leather portfolio containing copies of the signed agreement. The driver had offered to take me directly to the apartment despite my deferral, but I had declined, preferring to process the day's events before taking that next step. As we drove through Cleveland's streets, I felt a complex mixture of vindication, satisfaction, and something like wistfulness. The agreement represented everything I had hoped for professionally: recognition, compensation, continued involvement with my creation. Yet there was also a sense that something fundamental had shifted in my life's trajectory, opening possibilities I hadn't considered before losing my job and moving into Michael's basement. When we arrived at the house, I was surprised to find both Michael's and Jessica's cars in the driveway. It was barely 3 p.m. Neither of them typically returned home this early on a weekday. I found them in the kitchen, a bottle of champagne on ice between them, and 3 glasses arranged on the counter. "There she is," Michael said, grinning as I entered. "The newly minted chief architectural consultant." "Henderson called you already?" I asked, setting down my portfolio. 5 minutes after the agreements were signed, he confirmed. He said, and I quote, "Your mother is an impressive negotiator. I look forward to seeing what she does with our implementation team." Jessica lifted the champagne bottle. "We thought this called for a celebration." "You both left work early for this?" I was genuinely touched by the gesture. "Some things are more important than client meetings," Jessica said, deftly popping the cork. "Like celebrating when family receives well-deserved recognition." Family. The word resonated differently now than it had 3 weeks ago, when I had arrived at their doorstep with my suitcases and diminished expectations. Michael handed me a filled champagne flute. then raised his own. To Mom, for creating something extraordinary, for standing up for its proper recognition, and for showing all of us what quiet determination can accomplish. And to new beginnings, Jessica added, raising her glass. For all of us. We clinked glasses, the simple celebration feeling more genuine than any elaborate corporate acknowledgement could have. Here, in this kitchen where I had felt so unwelcome just days ago, was the recognition that perhaps mattered most. My son and daughter-in-law seeing me as someone of value, someone whose accomplishments deserved champagne and early departures from work. Henderson mentioned you have an apartment waiting for you, Michael said after we had all taken a sip. In the Churchill building downtown. He offered to have the driver take me there today, I acknowledged, but I thought perhaps we could visit it together this weekend, if you're interested. Something like relief crossed Michael's face. I'd like that, though you know you're welcome to stay here as long as you want. In the guest room, Jessica added quickly. Not the basement, never the basement again. We all laughed, the tension of the past weeks finding release in shared humor about our missteps. I appreciate that, I said sincerely. But having my own space will probably be best for all of us, especially as I begin this new role with Vertex. Michael nodded, understanding the unspoken reality that while our relationship had improved dramatically, we had established patterns that would be easier to reset with some physical separation. The Churchill is a great building, walking distance, to everything downtown, including Vertex headquarters. That's what Henderson said, I confirmed. Though he also mentioned something interesting. Apparently, Eleanor specifically recommended the unit they've secured for me. Jessica raised an eyebrow. Eleanor Henderson personally selected your apartment? That's unusual. I thought so too, I admitted. It seems the Hendersons are taking a particular interest in my situation. Henderson values what you created, Michael suggested, and he probably feels some corporate responsibility for how things were handled during the Midwest acquisition. Perhaps, though I suspected there might be more to it. Something in Eleanor's cafe approach and Robert's comments about my basement accommodations suggested a personal, rather than purely professional interest in my circumstances. Whatever their motivation, I said, refilling our glasses, I'm grateful for where we've landed. 3 weeks ago, I was unemployed with dwindling savings and diminishing prospects. Now I have professional recognition, financial security, and a meaningful role going forward. I raised my glass again. And most importantly, a restored relationship with both of you. Jessica flushed slightly, likely remembering her initial coldness, but raised her glass to meet mine. To restored relationships, she echoed. And proper recognition, both professional and personal. As afternoon turned to evening, we ordered takeout and continued our celebration, talking more openly than we had since my arrival. Michael shared stories about his early days at Vertex, the challenges he'd faced establishing himself outside his specific technical expertise. Jessica spoke about her struggles building her real estate business in a market dominated by established agencies with generational connections. For the first time, I felt not like an unwelcome guest or a burden to be managed, but like family, respected for my experiences, valued for my perspective, included in their lives as an equal rather than a dependent. When I finally retired, to the guest room that night I found myself thinking not about the $10 million payment or the 1.5% royalty agreement, but about the champagne in the kitchen and the genuine warmth in Michael's toast. Professional recognition mattered enormously. I had fought for it precisely because it did. But this personal recognition, this restoration of respect and family connection, felt equally valuable in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. I opened my laptop to send a final update to Thomas Wilson before bed, confirming my satisfaction with the day's outcomes and thanking him for his excellent representation. As I typed, a notification appeared, an email from Eleanor Henderson with the subject line, "Welcome to the Churchill." Curious, I opened it to find a brief but gracious message. "Sarah, Robert shared the good news about the finalized agreement. Congratulations on this well-deserved recognition of your extraordinary work. I hope you'll find the apartment at the Churchill a comfortable base for your new role with Vertex. I took the liberty of arranging for some basic furnishings and essentials. As Robert mentioned, you're currently in transition. Nothing elaborate, just enough to make it immediately habitable should you wish to move in quickly. If I've overstepped, please accept my apologies. I look forward to a proper introduction under better circumstances than our cafe encounter. Warm regards, Eleanor Henderson. The message was unexpected, both in its existence and its warmth. The Eleanor Henderson who had approached me at the cafe had been coolly strategic, focused on problem management rather than genuine connection. This note suggested either a remarkable transformation or a more complex person than I had initially perceived. I sent a polite reply thanking her for her thoughtfulness regarding the apartment, and then closed my laptop, too tired to puzzle further over the Hendersons' particular interest in my situation. That was a mystery for another day. Tonight, I would simply appreciate how far I had come from the basement bedroom and community center job applications of just a few days ago, not only professionally recognized and compensated, but personally revalued in ways that had seemed impossible when I first arrived at Michael's doorstep with my suitcases and diminished expectations. Tomorrow we would visit the apartment, begin planning my move to independent living, and start mapping out the next chapter of my professional life. But tonight, I would simply rest in the knowledge that both my work and I had finally received the recognition we deserved. Saturday morning arrived with golden autumn sunshine streaming through the guest room windows. I had slept better than I had in weeks, wrapped in the warm cocoon of security that comes from having your worth recognized, both professionally and personally. I dressed casually but carefully, selecting an outfit that struck the right balance between practical and polished for our visit to the Churchill apartment. Michael and Jessica were already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, Jessica flipping pancakes while Michael squeezed fresh orange juice, a weekend ritual I remembered from previous visits, though I'd never before been included in it. "Morning, Mom," Michael greeted me warmly. "Ready for apartment hunting?" "Well, apartment viewing, since it's already secured for you." "Definitely ready," I replied, accepting a mug of coffee from Jessica. Though I have to admit, I'm curious about Eleanor Henderson's involvement in selecting it. Her email last night mentioned she'd arranged for basic furnishings. Jessica raised an eyebrow. That's unusually hands-on for the CEO's wife. Eleanor has a reputation for being somewhat reserved in company matters. "Maybe it's guilt," Michael suggested, pouring juice into glasses. "Henderson was pretty disturbed when he found out about the basement situation, especially after learning about your down payment contribution to this house." I waved away this reference to past discomforts. Water under the bridge. Let's focus on moving forward, not looking back. After breakfast, we drove downtown to the Churchill, a sleek 30-story tower of glass and steel that represented the pinnacle of Cleveland's urban renewal. The doorman greeted us with practiced deference, checking my ID before escorting us to the private elevator that served the upper floors. 17th floor, corner unit, he confirmed, swiping his master key card. "Mrs. Henderson left specific instructions to expect you today." The elevator whisked us upward silently, opening directly into a small private foyer outside the apartment. Door. I used the key card Henderson had provided, and the door swung open to reveal a space that took my breath away. "Oh my," Jessica breathed behind me, equally stunned. The apartment was extraordinary, spacious and filled with light from floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased panoramic views of Lake Erie and the city skyline. The open-concept living area featured hardwood floors, sleek modern furniture, and tasteful artwork that somehow managed to feel both contemporary and welcoming. But what truly caught my attention were the bookshelves lining one wall, already filled with engineering texts, technical journals, and books on manufacturing. Optimization that mirrored my own professional library. the one I'd reluctantly placed in storage after selling my house. "These aren't just basic furnishings," I murmured, running my fingers along the spine of a rare text on integrated production systems. "This is a carefully curated collection." Michael examined a built-in desk by the window, complete with dual monitors and an ergonomic chair. "This is a professional workspace, designed specifically for an engineer focused on manufacturing systems." He looked at me with confusion. "How would Eleanor Henderson know exactly what resources you'd need?" I shook my head, equally puzzled. "I have no idea." We continued exploring. 2 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom, a gourmet kitchen equipped with high-end appliances, and a private terrace overlooking the cultural district. Every detail seemed personally selected, from the adjustable lighting optimized for detailed technical work to the standing desk option in the home office area. "This isn't standard executive housing," Jessica observed, her real estate expertise evident in her assessment. "This has been customized for you specifically." As we completed our tour, the apartment door chimed. Michael answered it to find a concierge holding an envelope. "For Ms. Johnson," he explained. "Mrs. Henderson asked that this be delivered when you arrived." I opened the envelope to find a handwritten note. "Sarah, I hope the apartment meets your needs. Perhaps you're wondering about the specific accommodations and professional resources. The truth is, we've met before, though you wouldn't remember. 25 years ago, you gave a guest lecture at Cleveland State on manufacturing optimization when I was completing my MBA. Your presentation fundamentally changed my understanding of integrated systems thinking and influenced my subsequent career path. When Robert mentioned your name in connection with the production system, I immediately recognized it, though I didn't say anything during our cafe meeting. That seemed inappropriate given the circumstances. Consider this apartment not corporate accommodation, but recognition from one professional woman to another of the impact your work has had beyond what you might have known. Please make this space your own, and I look forward to a proper conversation soon. Warmly, Eleanor." I read the note twice, then handed it to Michael and Jessica. "Well, that explains some things." "She was a student of yours?" Michael asked incredulously. "Eleanor Henderson?" "Apparently, I gave a guest lecture she attended," I clarified. "I did several of those during that period, trying to encourage more women to consider industrial engineering careers." I looked around the apartment with new understanding. This isn't just corporate housing, it's a gesture of professional recognition from someone who values what I contributed to the field. Later that evening, after we had returned to Michael's house and I had processed the day's revelations, my phone rang with an unknown number. "Sarah Johnson speaking," I answered. "Sarah, it's Eleanor Henderson." Her voice was warmer than during our cafe encounter. "I hope I'm not interrupting your evening." "Not at all," I assured her. "And thank you for your note today. The apartment is extraordinary, far beyond what I expected." "You saw the books? The technical setup?" she asked, a hint of uncertainty in her voice. "Yes, and I'm touched by the thoughtfulness behind those selections." "Good." She paused. I wanted to apologize properly for our first meeting. I approached it as a problem to be managed, rather than an opportunity to acknowledge a professional I've long admired. That was a mistake. "We were all navigating difficult territory," I said generously. "And it's worked out well in the end." "Indeed. Robert is quite impressed with how you handled everything, by the way. He mentioned that the implementation team is already excited to work with you." She hesitated. "I was wondering if you might be available for lunch next week? There's a small group of women in technical leadership positions across Cleveland's corporate landscape that meets monthly. I think they'd benefit enormously from your perspective, especially regarding intellectual property protection and proper attribution." The invitation represented yet another shift in how I was being perceived, from Michael's unemployed mother sleeping in a basement to a valuable professional voice worth including in leadership conversations. "I'd be delighted," I told her. Sincerely. After we hung up, I sat for a while in the guest room, reflecting on the remarkable journey of the past month. From the humiliation of job rejection and basement accommodation to professional recognition, financial security, and restored family relationships, all stemming from the simple act of standing up for the value of my work. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Mom, can we talk in the kitchen? Have an idea I want to run by you." I found him sitting at the island, a folder of papers before him. "Everything okay?" I asked. "More than okay," he replied. "I've been thinking about your system and its potential applications beyond medical device manufacturing." He opened the folder to reveal diagrams and flowcharts. "What if we adapted the core architecture for sustainable energy production? There are efficiency challenges in that sector that your approach might address perfectly." I sat down beside him, immediately engaged by the technical question. "Interesting. We'd need to modify the feedback loops to account for variable inputs, but the fundamental optimization principles would translate well." As we discussed the possibilities, I realized that Michael was talking to me not just as his mother, but as a respected colleague whose expertise he genuinely valued. This, even more than the apartment or the financial settlement, represented the most meaningful recognition of all. The next morning, I woke early and called Linda to update her on all that had happened. After expressing appropriate amazement at the apartment and the Eleanor Henderson revelation, she asked the most important question. "So when are you moving out of Michael's?" "Today, actually," I told her. "The apartment is ready and it feels right to establish my new independent life quickly. From basement dweller to luxury apartment owner in 1 week," Linda marveled. "That has to be some kind of record." "Not owner, it's part of my compensation package," I corrected her. "But yes, it's been quite a transformation." Later, as Michael helped carry my suitcases to his car for the drive downtown, Jessica appeared with a housewarming gift, a beautiful plant for my new terrace. "For new beginnings," she said, handing it to me. "And Sarah? Thank you for your grace throughout all of this. Many people would have remained bitter about how things started." "Life's too short for bitterness," I replied, accepting the plant. "And sometimes difficult beginnings lead to unexpected opportunities." As we drove toward the Churchill, Michael seemed thoughtful. Finally, he said, "I've been thinking about what happened. Not just the system and the recognition, but how we treated you when you lost your job." "Michael, we've moved past that," I assured him. "I know, but I need to say this." He kept his eyes on the road. "I realized I had fallen into the same trap that Midwest and Vertex did, discounting your value because it wasn't immediately visible to me. I saw your age and your job loss rather than your capabilities and contributions." He glanced at me briefly. "I'm not just sorry for the basement, Mom. I'm sorry for not seeing you clearly, for forgetting what you've built and what you're capable of." The simple acknowledgement meant more than any luxury apartment or financial settlement ever could. "Thank you," I said softly. "That means everything." When we arrived at the Churchill, the doorman greeted me by name and welcomed me home, a small gesture that signified my new standing. As we rode the elevator to the 17th floor, I felt a sense of possibility that had been missing since the day I received my layoff notice. Michael helped me settle in, arranging my few personal items around the already beautifully furnished space. As he prepared to leave, he paused by the door. "You know," he said with a smile, "I'm actually glad you lost your job." I raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Otherwise, we might never have discovered that my mother secretly owns the system that powers my company," he explained. "And I might have continued taking you for granted indefinitely." I laughed, appreciating his perspective. Sometimes life's setbacks are actually setups for something better. After Michael left, I stood alone in my new apartment, taking in the panoramic views of Cleveland, the city where I had built my career, raised my son, and now reclaimed my professional dignity. The journey from basement to penthouse had been swift and unexpected, but the real transformation wasn't in my living situation. It was in the recognition, by Vertex, by the Hendersons, and most importantly, by my own son, that value doesn't diminish with age. That experience and innovation deserve acknowledgement, regardless of corporate convenience. That contributions matter, even when they've been overlooked or deliberately obscured. I walked to the desk by the window, where Eleanor had arranged a workspace perfectly suited to my needs. Opening my laptop, I began drafting ideas for the sustainable energy application Michael had suggested. There was still so much to create, so much value to add, so many systems to optimize. And now, finally, I had the recognition, resources, and respect to do it all as my authentic self, not as someone's mother or former employee, but as Sarah Johnson, creator and innovator in her own right. The basement had been a temporary accommodation, but it had sparked a permanent reclamation of my value, both professional and personal. Sometimes you have to descend before you can truly rise. And rise I had, not just to the 17th floor, but to the fullness of recognition that every person deserves for their unique and valuable contributions to the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.